Standing at his bedroom window, 17-year-old Michael Anderson watched as the first rays of sunlight painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The quiet suburban neighborhood of Millbrook, Massachusetts was just beginning to stir. The distant sound of birds chirping mingled with the gentle rustling of leaves, creating a peaceful symphony that had become the backdrop to his morning prayers. The worn wooden cross hanging above his bed caught the early morning light, casting a subtle shadow on the wall, a daily reminder of the faith that had become his anchor through the storms of life. Michael closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face as he whispered his morning prayer, his voice barely audible in the stillness of dawn. "Lord, grant me strength for another day," he murmured, his fingers unconsciously tracing the small silver cross he wore around his neck, a 16th birthday gift from his father, Thomas. The cool metal against his skin served as a constant reminder of his family's unwavering faith, even in the face of their mounting challenges. The sound of clattering dishes downstairs signaled that his mother, Sarah, was already preparing breakfast. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted up to his room, mixing with the lingering scent of the lavender air freshener his mother insisted on using throughout their modest, two-story home. Michael could picture her moving about the kitchen with practiced efficiency, despite the exhaustion that seemed to permanently line her face these days. Running his fingers through his dark brown hair, Michael caught his reflection in the mirror. His hazel eyes, so much like his father's, looked back at him with a mixture of determination and apprehension. The white dress shirt and khaki pants that made up his private school uniform felt like armor, necessary protection against the battles he faced daily at Grace Valley Christian Academy. As he adjusted his collar, Michael's thoughts drifted to the day ahead. The whispers would start as soon as he walked through the school gates. They always did. The popular crowd, led by the charismatic Blake Richardson, had made it their mission to remind Michael daily of his family's financial situation and what they perceived as his outdated religious devotion. The sound of his younger sister Emma's footsteps in the hallway pulled him from his thoughts. "Michael, Mom says breakfast is ready." Her voice, bright and innocent at 12 years old, carried none of the weight that seemed to burden the rest of the family. "Coming, Em," he called back, gathering his textbooks and well-worn Bible into his backpack. The leather-bound book had been his grandfather's, its pages marked with years of careful notes and highlighted verses. It was more than just a book. To Michael, it was a legacy of faith passed down through generations of Andersons. Downstairs, the kitchen was alive with morning activity. Sarah Anderson moved with purpose despite her obvious fatigue, her nurse's scrubs already on for her early hospital shift. The dark circles under her eyes betrayed the long hours she'd been working to keep the family afloat since Thomas's illness had forced him to reduce his hours at the local church, where he served as maintenance supervisor. "Good morning, sweetheart." Sarah smiled warmly, placing a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of Michael. Her hands, rough from years of work, briefly rested on his shoulders in a gesture of silent support. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, Mom," Michael replied, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. The prophetic dreams had started 3 weeks ago, each one more vivid than the last. But he couldn't bring himself to worry her more than she already was. Thomas Anderson sat at the head of the table, his once robust frame now noticeably thinner. The morning paper lay folded beside his coffee cup, but his attention was focused on his family. Despite the pain that constantly shadowed his features, his eyes held the same unwavering faith that had guided the family through countless challenges. "Remember, son," Thomas spoke, his voice carrying the gentle authority that Michael had always admired. "Our strength comes not from what we possess, but from who possesses us." It was one of his favorite sayings, one that had taken on new meaning since the family's financial struggles had begun. Emma bounced in her seat, her pigtails swaying as she recounted her plans for the school day. Her innocence was a bright spot in their increasingly challenging lives, and Michael found himself smiling despite his concerns about the day ahead. The familiar sound of the school bus approaching drew Michael to his feet. He shouldered his backpack, feeling the weight of both his books and his responsibilities. The dreams weighed heavily on his mind, particularly the most recent one about Blake's upcoming party. The image of the collapsing ceiling and the screams of his classmates felt too real to ignore. "I'll be praying for you today," Thomas said, reaching out to squeeze Michael's hand. The gesture, simple as it was, carried years of understanding and support. Sarah rushed to give him a quick hug, pressing a brown paper lunch bag into his hands. "Remember who you are, Michael," she whispered, her words carrying the same message she'd been instilling in him since childhood. "You're an Anderson, and more importantly, you're a child of God." As Michael stepped out into the crisp autumn morning, the sun now fully risen above the horizon, he felt the familiar mix of dread and determination settle in his stomach. The dreams felt like a warning, one he couldn't ignore, even if no one else would believe him. But for now, he had to face another day at Grace Valley, where his faith would be tested in ways he never expected. The yellow school bus approached, its brakes squealing slightly as it came to a stop. Michael took a deep breath, adjusting the cross around his neck one last time before climbing aboard. As he made his way down the aisle, the whispers began, right on schedule. "Here comes the prophet," someone snickered, but Michael kept his head high, finding an empty seat near the middle of the bus. As the vehicle pulled away from his house, he caught one last glimpse of his father standing in the doorway, leaning slightly on his cane but raising his hand in a gesture of blessing. The bus ride to Grace Valley Christian Academy was a 15-minute journey that felt like an eternity. Michael could feel the stares and hear the barely concealed laughter, but he focused on the passing scenery instead. The New England autumn was in full swing, painting the world in brilliant shades of red and gold. He found comfort in the changing seasons, a reminder that nothing, not even the hardest times, lasted forever. Blake Richardson's voice carried from the back of the bus, where he held court among his followers. "Hey everyone, don't forget about my party this Saturday. My parents are out of town and the house is going to be packed." The excitement in his voice was met with eager responses from his peers. Michael's stomach churned as he remembered his dream, the grand Richardson house, the music, the laughter, and then the disaster. He closed his eyes, trying to push away the vivid images of chaos and destruction that had plagued his sleep. Grace Valley Christian Academy came into view, its imposing brick facade and white columns a testament to its prestigious status among private schools in the area. The morning sun glinted off the large cross mounted above the main entrance, a symbol that should have represented unity and acceptance, but often felt like a reminder of the disconnect between the school's proclaimed values and the reality of daily life within its walls. As Michael stepped off the bus, he caught sight of Ms. Carter, his English teacher, standing near the entrance. She was one of the few faculty members who seemed to truly understand him, often staying after class to discuss literature and faith in a way that made him feel heard and valued. "Good morning, Michael," she smiled warmly, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "How's your father doing?" "He's hanging in there, Ms. Carter. Thank you for asking." Michael appreciated her genuine concern, so different from the superficial sympathy he often received from others. The morning bell rang, sending students hurrying to their first classes. Michael made his way to his locker, trying to ignore the way conversation seemed to die down as he passed. His fingers worked the combination lock with practiced ease, but he froze when he saw what had been slipped through the vents, a crude drawing of him preaching to an empty room with the words "Prophet of Doom" scrawled across the top. Michael's hands trembled slightly as he crumpled the paper and shoved it into his pocket. The hurt was familiar by now, but it never seemed to sting any less. First period was advanced placement biology, where Michael usually found refuge in the logical world of science. But today, even the familiar comfort of empirical facts couldn't quiet the growing unease in his mind. As Dr. Matthews discussed, cellular reproduction, Michael's thoughts kept drifting to Blake's upcoming party and the disaster he felt certain would occur. "Mr. Anderson?" Dr. Matthews' voice cut through his thoughts. "Perhaps you'd like to share with the class what's so fascinating about the window." A few snickers rippled through the room as Michael straightened in his chair. "I'm sorry, Dr. Matthews, I was just receiving another divine revelation." Blake's mock whisper carried clearly across the room, drawing more laughter. Dr. Matthews raised an eyebrow. "That's enough, Mr. Richardson. Michael, please pay attention." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of classes and barely concealed taunts. By lunchtime, Michael's nerves were frayed, and his resolve was wearing thin. He found his usual spot in the cafeteria, a corner table where he could eat alone and study his Bible in relative peace. But today, Blake had other plans. The popular senior approached Michael's table, flanked by his usual group of followers. His perfectly styled hair and designer clothes marked him as someone who had never known what it was like to worry about money or status. "So, prophet," Blake's voice dripped with sarcasm, "are you coming to my party on Saturday? Or did God tell you it would be too much fun for your holy sensibilities?" Michael looked up from his lunch, meeting Blake's gaze steadily. "Blake, I need to talk to you about the party. I've been having these dreams." "Oh, here we go." Blake threw, his hands up dramatically, drawing attention from nearby tables. "Everyone gather round. The prophet is about to share another vision." The cafeteria grew quiet as students turned to watch the confrontation. Michael could feel his heart pounding, but he pressed on, knowing he had to try to warn them. "I'm serious, Blake. Something bad is going to happen. I've seen it. The ceiling in your living room, it's not safe. During the party, it's going to..." "Enough." Blake slammed his hands on the table, making Michael's water bottle topple over. "I don't know what kind of attention you're trying to get, but leave my party out of it. You're not invited anyway, so you don't have to worry about any collapsing ceilings." As Blake and his friends walked away laughing, Michael noticed Ms. Carter watching from across the cafeteria, concern evident on her face. He quickly gathered his things and headed for the library, seeking solace among the quiet stacks of books. The afternoon classes dragged on, each minute feeling like an hour. In history class, they were discussing the Great Awakening, and Michael couldn't help but see the parallels between the religious fervor of the past and his own situation. How many prophets and visionaries had been dismissed before their warnings proved true? After the final bell, Michael lingered in the empty classroom, gathering his courage for what he knew he had to do. He couldn't simply let his classmates walk into danger even if they wouldn't believe him. He had to try one more time. He found Blake in the parking lot, surrounded by his usual crowd as they made plans for Saturday night. Taking a deep breath, Michael approached the group. "Blake, please just listen to me for 1 minute." Blake turned, annoyance clear on his face. "What now, Anderson? More prophecies?" "I know you don't believe me, but I can't just stay quiet. The party, something's wrong with your house. I've seen it in my dreams clear as day. The ceiling is going to collapse during the party. People could get hurt." For a moment, Blake's expression flickered with something that might have been uncertainty. But then he laughed, the sound harsh and dismissive. "You know what your problem is, Anderson? You're so wrapped up in your religious delusions that you can't stand to see other people having fun. Well, guess what? The party is happening and nothing you say is going to change that." As Michael walked home that afternoon, the weight of his unsuccessful warnings hung heavy on his shoulders. The autumn wind had picked up, carrying the first hints of the storm that was predicted for the weekend. He couldn't shake the feeling. That time was running out. At home, he found his father in his usual spot by the living room window, Bible open on his lap. Thomas Anderson looked up as Michael entered, immediately sensing his son's distress. "Rough day?" he asked, patting the chair beside him. Michael sank into the seat, letting out a long breath. "Dad, what do you do when you know something bad is going to happen but no one will listen to you?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "You know, son, throughout history, God has often chosen unlikely messengers to deliver important warnings. Noah was mocked for building an ark. Jeremiah was thrown into a pit for his prophecies. The question isn't whether people will listen. It's whether we're faithful to deliver the message we've been given. But what if I'm wrong? What if these dreams are just dreams? Then you'll have acted out of genuine concern for others, and there's no shame in that." Thomas reached over to squeeze Michael's shoulder. "Keep praying for guidance, son. And remember, sometimes God's purpose in our trials isn't just about preventing disaster, but about showing others his love through our actions." That evening, as Michael sat at his desk trying to focus on homework, the wind continued to grow stronger outside his window. The weather forecast on his computer showed a severe storm system moving in for the weekend, exactly when Blake's party was scheduled to take place. He opened his Bible to the book of Daniel, finding comfort in the stories of another young man who had faced ridicule and danger because of his faith. As he read, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Jenny Martinez, a quiet girl from his biology class who had always been kind to him. "I heard what you said to Blake today," the message read. "I believe you." Michael stared at the words, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. Maybe he wasn't as alone as he thought. As Saturday approached, the dreams became more intense. Each night, Michael would wake in a cold sweat, the images of the disaster more vivid and detailed than before. He could see the exact moment when the first crack would appear, could hear the specific song that would be playing when the ceiling began to give way. On Friday afternoon, he made one last attempt to prevent the tragedy. He went to Principal Weber's office, hoping that an authority figure might take his concerns seriously. "Mr. Anderson," Principal Weber said, peering at him over his glasses, "while I appreciate your concern for your fellow students, I cannot act on what you describe as prophetic dreams, unless you have concrete evidence of a structural problem. With the Richardson residence, there's nothing I can do." Michael left the office feeling defeated but not surprised. As he walked down the empty hallway, he heard footsteps behind him. "Michael, wait." It was Ms. Carter hurrying to catch up with him. "I overheard your conversation with Principal Weber. I want you to know that I'm concerned too, not just about the party, but about you. You've seemed so troubled lately." "Ms. Carter, I know how it sounds, but these dreams, they're different. They're so real, and I can't shake the feeling that they're trying to tell me something important." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I believe that you believe it, Michael. And sometimes that's enough reason to act. Just be careful, okay?" Saturday dawned gray and threatening, with heavy clouds hanging low over Millbrook. Michael spent the morning in prayer, asking for guidance and strength. By afternoon, the wind had picked up significantly, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Despite not being invited, Michael knew he had to go to the party. If his dreams were right, he needed to be there to help. As evening approached, he told his parents he was going to the library to study. The guilt of the lie weighed heavily on him, but he saw no other choice. The Richardson house was already crowded when Michael arrived, music pulsing through the walls and out into the stormy night. He slipped in through the back door, trying to stay inconspicuous as he made his way through the crowd of dancing teenagers. The living room was exactly as he had seen it in his dreams. The elaborate chandelier swaying slightly with the bass of the music, the expensive furniture pushed against the walls to create a dance floor. And there in the ceiling he could see it, a hairline crack that no one else seemed to notice. Blake spotted him almost immediately. "Anderson, who invited you?" He pushed through the crowd, anger evident on his face. "Blake, please," Michael said, having to shout over the music. "Look at the ceiling, can't you see the crack?" "I've had enough of your crazy prophecies." Blake grabbed Michael's arm, starting to drag him toward the door. That's when Michael heard it. The same song. From his dreams, the heavy bass making the walls vibrate with an ominous rhythm. The crack in the ceiling seemed to pulse with each beat, growing wider by the minute. Thunder crashed outside, making several partygoers jump. "Everyone needs to get out," Michael shouted, his voice nearly drowned out by the music. "The ceiling is going to collapse." Blake tightened his grip on Michael's arm. "I said that's enough." But at that moment, a deafening crack echoed through the room, louder than the thunder, louder than the music. The hairline fracture in the ceiling suddenly split wide open, revealing the dark space above. Small pieces of plaster began raining down on the stunned teenagers below. Jenny Martinez was the first to react. "He's right. Everyone out," she screamed, pushing people toward the doors. The music cut off abruptly as panic set in. The sound of splintering wood and crumbling plaster filled the air as teenagers scrambled for the exits. Blake stood frozen, staring up at his family's collapsing ceiling with horror-struck disbelief. "Blake, move!" Michael grabbed his former tormentor's arm, yanking him toward the door just as a large section of the ceiling gave way, crashing down exactly where Blake had been standing moments before. The evacuation became chaotic as more sections of the ceiling began to fail. Michael's mind flashed back to his dreams, and he knew exactly which areas would collapse next. He positioned himself near the main doorway, directing people away from dangerous spots and toward safety. "Stay to the right," he shouted as another section crashed down on the left side of the room. "Watch out for the chandelier." The storm outside had intensified, rain pouring in through the growing holes in the ceiling. Lightning flashed, illuminating the destruction in stark bursts of light. Michael could hear sirens in the distance. Someone must have called emergency services. As the last few students made their way out, Michael did a final sweep of the room, checking behind furniture and in adjacent spaces for anyone who might have been trapped or injured. The house groaned ominously around him, water now streaming in from multiple breach points in the ceiling. He found a girl huddled beneath a sturdy table, too terrified to move. It was Sarah Chen, a freshman who had probably snuck into the party, without her parents' knowledge. "Come on," he said gently, extending his hand. "I'll help you get out." Just as they reached the doorway, the chandelier finally gave way, crashing to the floor in a spectacular shower of crystal and sparks. Sarah screamed, but Michael kept her moving forward, shielding her from the debris with his own body. Outside, the scene was chaos. Dozens of teenagers stood in the rain, many crying, others frantically calling their parents. Emergency vehicles were arriving, their lights painting the wet streets in alternating red and blue. Blake Richardson sat on the curb, his head in his hands, his designer clothes soaked through. When he saw Michael emerging with Sarah, he stood up, his face a mix of emotions: shame, gratitude, and lingering disbelief. "How did you know?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the storm. "How could you possibly have known?" Michael helped Sarah find her friends before turning to Blake. "I tried to tell you. God was warning me through those dreams. I couldn't just stand by and let people get hurt." Blake was quiet for a long moment, watching as firefighters and police officers secured the scene. Finally, he spoke again, his voice heavy with emotion. "I'm sorry, Michael, for everything. I've been terrible to you." The rain was still falling, but less intensely now. Emergency workers were interviewing witnesses, taking statements about what had happened. Parents began arriving, rushing to embrace their children with tears of relief. Mr. and Mrs. Richardson pulled up in their car, having cut their weekend trip short after receiving frantic calls about the disaster at their home. Their faces paled as they saw the extent of the damage, but their first concern was for the safety of the teenagers. "Is everyone all right?" Mrs. Richardson asked, her voice shaking. "Was anyone hurt?" "Everyone's safe," Blake assured them, then hesitated before adding, "Because of Michael. He knew this was going to happen. He tried to warn me, but I wouldn't listen." Michael stood quietly as Blake explained everything: the dreams, the warnings, the evacuation. Mr. Richardson listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each detail. "Young man," he said finally, turning to Michael, "it seems we owe you a tremendous debt of gratitude. If you hadn't been here—" He couldn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. News of what happened spread quickly through the community. By Sunday morning, the story was front-page news in the local paper. "Teen's premonition prevents tragedy at house party." The article detailed how Michael's warnings and quick thinking had helped prevent what could have been a devastating accident. At church that morning, Michael sat with his family, feeling the weight of many eyes upon him. But the stares were different now, filled with wonder and respect rather than judgment and derision. Pastor Roberts even mentioned him in his sermon, speaking about how God still works through modern-day prophets and the importance of listening to those who speak uncomfortable truths. The following week at school was surreal. The whispers continued, but they had transformed from mocking to amazed. Students who had never spoken to him before stopped him in the hallways to thank him or ask questions about his experience. Blake's transformation was perhaps the most remarkable. On Monday morning, he approached Michael's lunch table, tray in hand. "Mind if I sit with you?" he asked. a hint of his old confidence gone, replaced by genuine humility. The two began talking, really talking, for the first time. Blake opened up about the pressures he felt to maintain his popular image, the exhaustion of always having to be the life of the party. Michael shared his own struggles with faith, doubt, and the weight of his prophetic dreams. "I still don't understand it all," Blake admitted, "but I know what I saw. And I know that you saved lives that night, including mine." The structural inspection of the Richardson house revealed that years of hidden water damage had severely compromised the ceiling's integrity. The heavy bass from the party speakers, combined with the vibrations from the storm, had been the final straw that triggered the collapse. "You know what's crazy?" Blake said one day as they walked to class together. "If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't known exactly which areas would collapse first, people could have been trapped. We wouldn't have known which way to run." The experience changed both boys profoundly. Blake began attending church with Michael, not out of fear or obligation, but out of genuine curiosity about the faith that had given Michael such clear purpose and conviction. Michael found himself with a new platform to share his faith, but he remained humble, always pointing to God rather than taking credit for himself. When younger students came to him with their own struggles and doubts, he listened with compassion, remembering how it felt to be dismissed and disbelieved. The dreams didn't stop entirely, but they changed. Instead of warnings of disaster, they became messages of hope and guidance, not just for himself, but for others in the community. Michael learned to balance these gifts with wisdom and discretion, understanding that not every dream required immediate action, and not every warning needed to be shared publicly. His father's health began to improve, something Thomas attributed to the reduced stress of seeing his son finally accepted and understood by his peers. The family's financial situation also eased as members of the community, led by the Richardsons, set up a fund to help with Thomas's medical expenses. Jenny Martinez, who had been the first to believe Michael's warnings, became a close friend. Her quiet faith and steadfast support helped him navigate his new role in the school community. Together, they started a prayer and support group for students dealing with their own struggles and questions about faith. The experience also brought unexpected healing to the school itself. The division between the popular crowd and others began to dissolve as students realized the superficiality of such distinctions. Blake used his influence to promote inclusion and kindness, becoming an unlikely but effective advocate for change. Principal Weber even approached Michael to apologize for dismissing his concerns. "You've taught us all something important about listening to those who speak up, even when their messages are difficult to believe," he admitted. As the school year progressed, the story of the miraculous warning and rescue became part of Grace Valley's folklore. But for Michael, the most significant change wasn't in how others saw him, but in how he understood his own faith and purpose. One evening, as he sat with his father reading scripture, Thomas shared a perspective that helped Michael make sense of everything that had happened. "Sometimes, son," he said, "God allows us to go through periods of isolation and misunderstanding, not to punish us but to prepare us. Your faith was tested and strengthened during those difficult times so that when the moment came to act, you were ready." Michael nodded, thinking of all the changes the past few months had brought. The morning prayers that had once been solitary rituals were now often shared with others who sought his guidance and insight. The Bible study sessions that had once marked him as an outsider had become popular gatherings where students felt safe to explore their questions and doubts. Even his relationship with Blake had evolved into something neither boy could have imagined. They had become not just friends but brothers in faith, each learning from the other's experiences and perspective. The dreams continued to come, but Michael no longer feared them. Instead, he had learned to approach them with discernment and wisdom, understanding that sometimes the greatest miracles weren't in the dramatic rescues, but in the quiet transformations of hearts and minds. As he looked out his bedroom window, each morning watching the sun rise over Millbrook, Michael felt a deep sense of peace. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had led him exactly where he needed to be, not just as a messenger of warnings, but as a living testament to the power of unwavering faith and the transformative impact of standing firm in one's beliefs. The story of the party and the collapse became more than just a tale of disaster averted. It became a testimony to the ways in which God could use anyone, even a seemingly ordinary teenager, to make an extraordinary difference in the lives of others. And in the end, that was the greatest miracle of all. And in the end, that was the greatest miracle of all. The way God had transformed a community through one person's unwavering faith. As spring approached, the changes in Grace Valley Christian Academy had become deeply rooted, extending far beyond the immediate aftermath of the party incident. Michael's senior year was drawing to a close, and college acceptance letters had started arriving. Yale, Princeton, and Stanford had all offered him scholarships, impressed not just by his academic achievements but by the compelling personal essay he'd written about his experiences. The story of faith, persecution, and ultimate vindication had resonated deeply with admission committees. Blake, who had once mocked Michael's faith, now sat beside him during weekly Bible study sessions. Their unlikely friendship had become a powerful testimony to the transformative power of grace and forgiveness. Blake had even started mentoring younger students, sharing his own journey from skeptic to believer with disarming honesty. "You know what still amazes me?" Blake said one afternoon as they sat in the school courtyard. "It's not just the warning about the party. It's how everything changed after that night. It's like God used that moment to shake us all awake." Sarah Anderson had noticed the change in her son as well. The quiet, introspective boy who had once hurried through hallways with his head down now walked with quiet confidence. His faith, tested by fire, had emerged stronger and more authentic than ever. "I see God's hand in all of this," she told him one evening as they prepared dinner together. "Not just in the dramatic moments, but in the small changes, the daily victories, the hearts that have been softened." Thomas Anderson's health had stabilized, allowing him to return to his maintenance duties at church. The community's support had eased their financial burdens, but more importantly, it had shown them they weren't alone in their struggles. The Anderson family had become a living testament to the power of perseverance and faith. The dreams continued, but they had evolved. Instead of warnings of physical danger, they often contained messages of hope and guidance for others. Michael had learned to balance these spiritual gifts with wisdom and discretion, understanding that sometimes the most powerful ministry happened in quiet conversations and simple acts of kindness. Jenny Martinez had become an integral part of their growing faith community at school. Her artistic talents found expression in designing posters for their prayer meetings and creating a mural in the school hallway that depicted the story of Daniel in the Lion's Den, a story that now held special meaning for many students who had witnessed Michael's own journey through persecution to vindication. "Sometimes I think about how different everything would be if you hadn't listened to those dreams," Jenny told Michael as they worked on their senior yearbook together. "Not just the party, but everything that came after. How many lives have been touched because you were willing to stand firm in your faith?" The impact rippled beyond the school walls. Other schools in the district had heard about the changes at Grace Valley and had invited Michael to speak to their students about faith, courage, and the importance of standing up for one's beliefs. His message resonated particularly strongly with teenagers who felt isolated or misunderstood. Principal Weber had become one of Michael's strongest supporters, often consulting him about ways to foster a more inclusive and spiritually nurturing environment at Grace Valley. The administrator who had once dismissed Michael's warnings now valued his insight and perspective. "You've taught us all something important about listening," Weber admitted during a school assembly. "Not just listening to warnings of physical danger, but listening to those quiet voices that challenge us to be better, to look deeper, to care more." As graduation approached, Michael found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past year. The morning prayers that had once been solitary acts of devotion had become communal celebrations of faith. The Bible he had once hidden from ridicule was now openly discussed and studied by groups of students during lunch breaks. The Richardson house had been repaired, its new ceiling a testament to both structural integrity and spiritual renewal. The Richardsons had insisted on hosting a celebration there once the repairs were complete. Not a wild party this time, but a gathering of thanksgiving that brought together students, parents, and teachers in a spirit of gratitude and unity. "It's like the house itself is a metaphor," Blake observed during the celebration. "What was broken has been made stronger, What was hidden has been brought to light. What could have destroyed us has instead rebuilt us. Michael's father, watching his son interact with his peers at the gathering, felt his heart swell with pride and gratitude. "You see, son," he said quietly, "sometimes God's greatest works aren't in preventing disasters, but in using them to build something new and beautiful from the ruins." The senior class had chosen Michael as their graduation speaker, a role he accepted with characteristic humility. As he worked on his speech, he found himself returning to the themes that had defined his journey: faith, perseverance, community, and the courage to stand firm in one's convictions. Emma, now 13, had become her brother's biggest cheerleader. She proudly told anyone who would listen about how her brother's faith had changed their school and community. Her innocent pride helped keep Michael grounded, reminding him that true ministry often happened in simple, everyday moments. As the school year drew to a close, Michael received an unexpected letter from a sophomore he barely knew. The student wrote about how watching Michael's journey had given him the courage to face his own struggles with faith and identity. "You showed me that being different isn't a weakness," the letter read. "It's an opportunity to show others what God can do, through one person who's willing to stand firm." The local newspaper ran a follow-up story on the one-year anniversary of the party incident. The reporter interviewed various students and teachers, documenting the lasting changes that had occurred at Grace Valley. The article's headline captured it perfectly. "From Crisis to Community: How One Student's Faith Transformed a School." During his final week at Grace Valley, Michael took a moment to visit his old locker, where cruel notes had once been slipped through the vents. Now encouraging messages and Bible verses were often left there by students seeking guidance or wanting to share their own testimonies of faith. Ms. Carter, who had been one of the first teachers to show Michael kindness, summed it up best during their final class together. "You know, Michael," she said, "sometimes God's greatest miracles aren't the dramatic moments of rescue, though we certainly witnessed one of those. Sometimes they're in the quiet transformation of hearts, the slow healing of wounds, the gradual building of bridges between people who once saw themselves as enemies." As Michael prepared for graduation and the next chapter of his life, he understood that his journey had never really been about the dreams or the dramatic rescue. It had been about learning to trust God's timing, to stand firm in faith despite opposition, and to let God's love flow through him to others. The prophetic dreams that had once caused him such anxiety had become a source of comfort and guidance, not just for him, but for the entire community. They were a reminder that God still spoke to his people, still worked miracles, still transformed lives, sometimes through dramatic interventions, but more often through the faithful witness of those willing to stand firm in their convictions. On graduation day, as Michael stood at the podium looking out over the faces of his classmates, teachers, and family, he felt overwhelmed by God's faithfulness. The journey had been difficult, but every step had led to this moment. Not just his personal triumph, but the triumph of faith itself. His valedictory speech would be remembered not for its eloquence, though it was eloquent, but for its authenticity. He spoke about the power of unwavering faith, the importance of community, and the way God could use anyone, even a lonely, misunderstood teenager, to bring about lasting change. "Our story isn't just about a miraculous warning or a prevented disaster," he concluded. "It's about how God can take our deepest struggles and turn them into testimonies of His grace. It's about how one person's faith can ignite a flame that spreads far beyond anything we could imagine. And most of all, it's about how God's love can transform not just individuals but entire communities, when we have the courage to stand firm in our faith." As the applause washed over him, Michael caught his father's eye in the audience. Thomas Anderson's face shone with pride and tears, but more than that, it reflected the joy of seeing God's faithfulness displayed so powerfully in his son's life. The story of Michael Anderson and Grace Valley Christian Academy would be told and retold in the years to come, not just as a tale of prophetic dreams and dramatic rescue, but as a testament to the enduring power of faith, the strength of community, and the miraculous ways in which God could work through one person's unwavering commitment to truth. And as Michael stepped down from the podium, diploma in hand and future bright before him, he knew that this wasn't the end of his story. It was just the beginning of a lifetime of walking in faith, standing firm in truth, and watching God work miracles through ordinary people who dared to believe. As Michael stepped into his future, the lessons learned at Grace Valley became the foundation for an even greater journey. He had chosen Yale, not just for its prestigious academic programs, but because he felt a clear calling to bring his testimony to a secular environment where faith often faced different kinds of challenges. The summer after graduation passed quickly, filled with preparation for college and precious moments with family and friends. Blake, who would be attending Boston University, spent countless hours with Michael, strengthening their friendship and discussing their shared vision for continuing their ministry in their respective universities. "It's going to be different," Blake admitted during one of their last conversations before departure. "We won't have the support system we built at Grace Valley. We'll be starting fresh, facing new kinds of opposition." Michael nodded, understanding the weight of Blake's words. "But that's exactly why we're being sent there. Remember how it all started? One person standing firm in faith can spark a movement." Move-in day at Yale arrived with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The historic campus, with its Gothic architecture and ivy-covered walls, felt worlds away from the familiar comfort of Millbrook. Michael's roommate, David Chen, was a pre-med student from California who initially regarded Michael's open faith with skeptical curiosity. "So you're the guy who had those prophetic dreams?" David asked while unpacking, having Googled Michael's name. That must have been intense. The question opened the door for Michael to share his testimony, but he'd learned to do so with wisdom and patience. Rather than launching into the dramatic details of the party incident, he focused on the deeper truth of God's faithfulness and the power of community. As the semester progressed, Michael found himself navigating a complex spiritual landscape. Yale's diverse student body included people from every faith tradition, as well as passionate atheists and skeptics. The intellectual challenges to his faith were different from the social persecution he'd faced in high school, more subtle, more sophisticated, but no less real. In his philosophy of religion class, Professor Harrison often used Michael's contributions to spark deeper discussions. "Mr. Anderson brings up an interesting point about personal religious experience," he would say. "How do we reconcile individual spiritual encounters with empirical reality?" These academic challenges forced Michael to develop a more nuanced understanding of his faith. The dreams continued, but they had evolved yet again. Now they often contained insights that helped him bridge the gap between faith and reason, showing him ways to communicate spiritual truths in an academic context. A turning point came during a late-night discussion in the dormitory common room. A group of students had gathered to debate the existence of God, and Michael found himself at the center of the conversation. Instead of becoming defensive, he shared his story with humility and openness, acknowledging the mysteries of faith while standing firm in his convictions. "I can't prove my experiences scientifically," he admitted, "but I can tell you how they've transformed lives. Faith isn't just about supernatural experiences. It's about the everyday miracle of changed hearts and renewed minds." His authenticity resonated with his peers. Soon, a small group began meeting regularly in his dorm room for Bible study and prayer. David, his roommate, was one of the first to join, moved not by dramatic testimonies, but by the quiet consistency of Michael's faith in action. The group grew organically, attracting students from various backgrounds who were seeking something deeper than academic success or social status. They named themselves Standing Firm, inspired by Michael's high school journey, but focused on the unique challenges of maintaining faith in an elite academic environment. Back in Millbrook, the impact of Michael's testimony continued to ripple outward. Grace Valley had maintained its spiritual revival, with Blake's younger sister now leading the prayer group he and Michael had started. The Richardson House had become a regular meeting place for youth gatherings, its restored ceiling a constant reminder of God's protection and purpose. Thomas Anderson's health continued to improve, allowing him to expand his ministry at church. He often shared updates with Michael about how their family's story was still touching lives in the community. "Your courage didn't just change our school," he wrote in an email. It showed people that God still speaks, still moves, still transforms lives today. During fall break, Michael returned home to find that his story had taken on new dimensions. Other schools in the region had implemented programs inspired by Grace Valley's transformation. The local church had started a youth mentoring initiative, pairing older believers with teenagers struggling to maintain their faith in challenging environments. Jenny Martinez, now studying art at Rhode Island School of Design, had created a series of paintings inspired by Michael's prophetic dreams. The artwork captured not just the dramatic moments of divine intervention, but the quieter themes of persistence, growth, and community. When the series was displayed at a gallery in Providence, it sparked conversations about faith and art that crossed cultural and religious boundaries. Back at Yale, Michael found himself increasingly drawn to the intersection of faith and psychology. His own experiences with prophetic dreams and spiritual warfare had given him unique insights into the human psyche and the role of faith in mental health. Professor Sarah Matthews, his psychology advisor, took a special interest in his perspective. "Your ability to integrate spiritual experience with psychological understanding is remarkable," she observed. "Have you considered pursuing this academically?" The suggestion resonated with Michael's growing sense of purpose. He began to see how God was using his academic journey to prepare him for a broader ministry, one that could bridge the gap between spiritual experience and scientific understanding. During his sophomore year, Michael started a research project exploring the psychological impact of spiritual experiences on community transformation. The study used Grace Valley as a case study, but expanded to examine similar phenomena in various cultural and religious contexts. The dreams evolved once again, becoming more focused on guidance for others rather than warnings of physical danger. Michael learned to integrate these spiritual insights with his growing psychological knowledge, developing a unique approach to mentoring that respected both faith and reason. Blake, meanwhile, had started a similar movement at Boston University. The two friends regularly shared strategies and encouragement, marveling at how God was using their different locations and contexts to reach diverse groups of students. "Remember when we thought the party incident was the big miracle?" Blake reflected during one of their video calls. "But look at what God's doing now. He's using our stories to help others stand firm in their own journeys." Emma, now in high school herself, had followed in her brother's footsteps as a bold witness for her faith. She often called Michael for advice, sharing her own experiences of standing firm in an increasingly challenging cultural landscape. "You made it easier for us," she told him during one conversation. "Not because you prevented all opposition, but because you showed us how to face it with grace and courage." As his undergraduate years progressed, Michael's influence continued to expand beyond campus boundaries. He was invited to speak at conferences and youth retreats, sharing not just his testimony but the deeper lessons about faith, community, and personal growth that had emerged from his journey. The prophetic dreams that had once marked him as an outsider had become a gateway for discussing deeper spiritual truths in academic settings. His research project had evolved into a potential thesis, exploring the intersection of spiritual experience, psychological resilience, and community transformation. David, his once skeptical roommate, had become one of his closest friends and strongest supporters. "You've shown me that faith doesn't require checking your brain at the door," he admitted. "It's about integrating truth from every realm: spiritual, intellectual, emotional." As junior year drew to a close, Michael received an unexpected invitation. A major publisher was interested in turning his story into a book, seeing it as a bridge between traditional testimonial literature and academic exploration of spiritual experience. The prospect of writing his story felt daunting, but Michael recognized it as another opportunity to stand firm in his calling. The book would not just recount the dramatic events of his high school years, but would explore the longer journey of faith development in an increasingly complex world. "Your story matters," his father reminded him during one of their weekly calls. "Not because it's spectacular, but because it's real. It shows people that standing firm in faith isn't about being perfect. It's about being authentic and allowing God to work through your experiences." As Michael began working on the book manuscript, he realized that his journey had come full circle. The lonely teenager who had once faced ridicule for his faith had become a bridge builder, helping others navigate their own paths between faith and reason, between spiritual experience and academic rigor. The dreams continued, but they had become part of a larger tapestry of divine guidance in his life. They reminded him that God's work wasn't finished, that each new chapter brought fresh opportunities to stand firm, to grow, and to help others find their way. And as he looked toward his senior year at Yale, Michael understood that his story was still unfolding. The miracle wasn't just in the dramatic moments of divine intervention, but in the daily choice to stand firm in faith, to integrate truth from every source, and to help others find their own path to authentic faith in an increasingly complex world.